According to this computer. Well, it is good to be with you, Jason. This is Jason Whitehead, Reverend Dr. Jason Whitehead, who I've had the privilege of knowing for several years now through my work at ILIF and then out in the community and now with Juniper Formation. And I get to see his work with his wonderful organization, Mosaic Insight. He is the web guru, he is the counselor, pastor, consultant, all the things, as many entrepreneurial ministries are these days. And Jason has a fantastic role in Juniper Formation as he helps navigate their really discernment cohorts and just walks alongside a lot of folks. In addition, Jason has his licensed clinical social work background and is somebody who has journeyed with folks through grief and fear and life transitions in many ways. And so we are grateful to have him as part of our series around life discussions during times of COVID-19 safety measures. And so, Jason, I'm grateful to have you join with us today, and I will hand it over to you to begin, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Morgan. And it's wonderful to be with everybody, of course, everybody meaning whoever happens upon this video or whoever happens to watch the video up until the point where I say it's good to be with all of you. So we thought we would start the conversation a bit today talking about fear, which is an emotion that's, I guess if an emotion is near and dear to my heart, this one is one because I've spent a lot of time with it. My background and my work at ILIF revolved around studying fear a good bit. And it's an emotion that is really important to understand, especially in a time like this, where there's a lot of uncertainty, where we can read or turn to various news sources and feel like we are threatened by what happens or what we're reading. And so what I thought I would kind of begin and talk about a little bit is how do we recognize when we're afraid? Because there's certain biological things, there's certain things our body does when we're afraid. And the simple fact of things is that we're all going to be afraid from time to time. Our bodies are set up, our brains are set up to be afraid. It's what protects us in the environment. Fear is quite possibly one of our most adaptive emotions because it's meant to help us preserve ourselves when something is going on around us that we don't understand, something is going on around us that feels like it would in some way intrude or be invasive in our lives. And so a lot of us probably know about the behaviors that we associate with fear. And those behaviors are, fight, flight, freeze, appease is a fourth behavior in there as well that most people don't talk about, but that's the one where we just kind of agree to everything or everybody that's going on around us because our minds usually feel so threatened that we would rather not stand out because the threat to our identity is too great. But there are accompanying emotions, accompanying behaviors with fight. We see a lot of anger, we see a lot of aggression. With flight, we see a lot of retreat, some sadness, some depression that goes with that. With freeze, it's really generally that behavior of where we're observing the world around us and we don't know what to do. We have so many conflicting kinds of things that our bodies just freeze up. And that's the curious thing about fear in particular. Where it comes from in the brain is these two little pockets of nerves that are right behind your eyeballs. And those kind of bundles of nerves right there are directly connected to the systems in our body that control muscle behavior, that control our breathing, that control our capacity to act and react in the environment. And so what happens when we're afraid, and you've probably felt this before, is that we get tense really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Our muscles kind of tense up, and you know, the blood draining from your face, you know, when people turn white as a sheet, or they turn pale, it actually is the blood draining from the top of your body into your limbs so that your muscles can react effectively to a threat in the environment. And so the blood begins to pool in our muscles as they tense up so that we can react to what's going on around us. And this is what helps our ancestors survive, you know, the random lion that they happen upon, or the big canyon that they're looking down over, you know, if they're looking at heights, or the weird looking snake in the grass that they don't know what to do with. What also happens is our eyes dilate. So we take in a lot more light, and we tend to take in more of our surroundings, but we hyper focus on something in particular. This is why eyewitness accounts aren't very reliable, is because our eyes get so wide, but we focus on particular things and we don't get all the details that are going on because we're focusing on that threat in particular. Another piece is our digestive system shuts down. So when we're diverting blood from places in our body, our digestive system, so you know, you get gut feelings and you get tense, your gut gets tense in those moments. It's because it's shutting down to, again, to conserve resources for a reaction rather than a response. And probably the most particular things, or two of the most important things that we can point to when we're afraid is the hyper awareness and the hyper vigilance. And so, you know, if you've ever seen a rabbit freeze, we've got plenty of rabbits up here in Park Hill that just kind of, and the moment it sees you, it just kind of stops and stares at you, and it just watches you. And any movement, and it jumps, but it becomes really hyper vigilant or hyper aware of what's going on in its surroundings. We become hyper vigilant about how do we escape, how do we leave, how do we run from, how do we move out of a particular fearful situation. And this is one of the things that I think is really particular to this COVID space, because we have so much, you know, we have a baseline of information, but a lot of it feels like it changes. And so we become hyper aware or hypersensitive or hyper vigilant about the news, or what our neighbors are doing, or what are we supposed to be doing. And so we kind of freeze in space. We become kind of like that rabbit a little bit that just sits there and stares at the news without knowing which, you know, which direction to run in, or what we need to do in that moment. And as COVID kind of drags on here, and what is being asked of us changes and continues to change over time, this perpetual state of fear, which is actually really unhealthy for us, pervades. Fear in our kind of background as human beings is meant to be really temporary. It is meant to be something that, you know, when I teach about this, it's a quick hit emotion. We experience it, we have a particular threat, we react, and then we move on. But when we're in this state, or in this space of constantly being aware or constantly being vigilant about our own behavior, about others' behaviors, about the news, the changing public health information, but we have difficulty letting go of being afraid, which means that our muscles remain kind of tense. They continue to be tense over time.
Mm-hmm.
Our stress reactions are heightened. Our awareness of things are heightened, and so we react to things that we normally wouldn't react to. Um, something that maybe a child that is now living with us all the time that wouldn't have been a big deal 6 months ago suddenly becomes huge. Or a spouse or a partner or friend, or we see something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, and our reaction, which would normally feel muted, or nowadays would feel muted, what feels normal to us now is probably a little bit of an overreaction, because we're trying to find ways to relieve that stress and relieve that tension. And so part of what becomes important about fear is just recognizing when those certain kind of bodily markers awaken in us. Where are we feeling kind of abnormal tension? What are we reading that's causing a reaction to us? And how can we name what it is that we're feeling in that moment? One of the difficult things to do, I think, for a lot of people is to physically name what they're feeling. I'm reading this. This feels scary, or this makes me angry, or I'm going to celebrate. This is really good news. I feel joy, and that capacity to expand our emotional range in many ways becomes important in this time, and our capacity to really name what it is we're feeling, to mark that, becomes vital to really kind of expressing fully what it is we're experiencing, rather than allowing one emotion to take over. And fear is probably one of the most powerful ones that we have. It's one of the ones that marks our memories more significantly than other emotions do, because, again, we're about preserving our lives in many ways, and what we're going to remember are the threats that threaten to take away something that's meaningful to us. And so those have a priority in our processing. And the more that we can kind of counter that fear narrative with other stories from time to time, the better opportunities we have to release some of that stress, release some of that tension that kind of remains at a low level after we feel like we've been threatened. For me, as a theologian and a pastor, we read all sorts of stuff about fear, and sometimes it's relationship to faith. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the messages that we hear are really simple about something that is actually pretty complex at the end of the day, because when human beings in particular experience the emotion of fear, we like to make sense out of things. We want to know why we're afraid. We want to know why that's threatening to us. We want to know the meaning of it. We want to know, we want to understand things generally. And this is where I think we're different from the rabbit that's sitting sitting on our lawn or in the driveway or wherever it may be, is that we have the capacity to reflect once the situation has passed on what it is that caused us to feel afraid. And as a pastor and a theologian here, to me, that's the moment when we can begin to understand not what it is we're running from, but what it is we're running toward. What it is that we want to preserve our life for. Is it for another relationship? Is it for a spouse? Is it for a partner? Is it for a child? Is it for a friend, a community? What is it that we're living toward, rather than what is it that we're moving away from? can be a source for us in our reflections for what it is that we hope for in life. Providing, again, an alternative story to "I'm just scared" to really hope that this can be a part of my life in future moments. I really value this relationship. I really value this time. I really value this experience or this opportunity. And that's not saying every fear that we experience will do that for us. But if we're intentional about naming and understanding where it is it's coming from, there can be some opportunities there to kind of broaden it a little bit and make it more complex than just a simple bodily reaction, which can also help, again, with tension and help with stress and help release some of that just stuff that clouds how we see the world nowadays. And treat it as a both and rather than an either or.
Yeah. Well, I think the pieces that I really appreciate about what you just said, one, the appease is new, and freeze was new just a few years ago, because so often it was just fight or flight, like either, and a lot of the messaging I got growing up was if you weren't strong, you fled. And if you were strong, you fought, right? And then I was like, well, I don't know. I feel like there's another. And then when I heard freeze, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because so often we don't know what to do. We're paralyzed in decision making and physicality in those moments sometimes. Even if it's not a physical threat, it can, much like with COVID-19, like it can be like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to stay here. Like, I'm not sure what option. And then to hear appease was really helpful, because if you're from a dynamic where you need to protect yourself and there's somebody in power that is the one causing that fear, whether that's a relationship or employment, it could be, I know a lot of folks are afraid of losing their jobs, and it may not be a healthy scenario right now. And so they're just appeasing their employer, right? Or could be just out in society, right? You may not agree with the safety measures, but you are afraid of what might happen. We're hearing a lot of reports starting to come out about physical altercations around social distancing, mask wearing, etc. And so it's like, I will appease with whatever needs to happen so that I can get back home.
Right.
And so I think the helpful piece about knowing that there's really 4 categories around how we might respond, knowing that they're not isolated, that they can interchange depending on any given scenario, but to have the piece you followed up with, which is, how can we name what we're feeling? And I think that's incredibly hard when there is a dominant feeling that kind of doesn't give up. And so if we're feeling fear regularly, how can we interject moments of joy or moments of celebration, or getting beyond that and say, I'm actually grieving, or I am angry, or I am depressed, I am disappointed, I am hopeful. I think a lot of folks might feel foolish in conversations if they admitted they are hopeful about things, because they might be the only one expressing it, right?
Right.
And so I appreciate that framework, because it allows us to tap in to more than just, I'm afraid. How are we reacting? And then giving framework for how do we actually touch base with ourselves, not just the external, right? But touch base with our internal self to go, okay, this is actually what I'm feeling. And that can be a whole level of vulnerability that we've either trained ourselves not to tap into for whatever reason, or we may be so exhausted right now that the thought of actually identifying true emotion may feel like it's more than we have capacity for. And yet you've given us entry points to start that work.
Right. I mean, even if you, even if emotional language is new to you, or being able to say that, a lot of times in therapeutic practice, we'll just start with 4 basic words. I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel glad, I feel afraid. And if we can start with those kind of 4 basic, and there's some other stuff out there that discussed, and some other emotions are basic to kind of how our brain functions and releases neurochemicals to make us feel better. Those 4 tend to be the 4 that are agreed upon. But if we need practice, or we need words, mad, sad, glad, afraid can really provide a base level of how am I reacting to what's going on around me, and provides the opportunity to say, okay, to start to get creative if we really want to. Well, I'm not quite glad. This makes me just a little. This makes me smile. This makes me happy. This makes me joyous. I want to celebrate this. And so we can start to kind of ladder some other words around those particular 4. But once we get those 4 words down, and once we can kind of talk about those, then we can expand our vocabulary a bit. It's having those is really an opportunity and a gateway into expressing ourselves with some vulnerability to folks, but also giving other folks permission to express themselves as well. And that becomes vital in this particular space, where we're somewhat removed physically. And so it's hard to kind of empathically intuit what people might be feeling. And when we're spending a lot of time on Zoom calls, the more that we can kind of name what it is we're feeling, the less energy we're spending on the call trying to figure it out. And so it provides an opportunity, again, to make these kinds of calls a little more vulnerable, and a little more experiential, I think, for everybody involved, when we can name things rather than tiptoeing around what we might be thinking maybe that someone there could be experiencing, based on their facial expressions, how their body is, whether they turn their screen on or off, whether they mute or unmute, and those kinds of things. And so there's a sense of emotional transparency that's possible when we just kind of get some of the basic stuff down when we're checking in, and it allows other people an entree to check in with us. Oh, you're mad. Tell me what mad's about. What does mad look like for you right now? So yeah, it's a great learning opportunity, but I think it starts, you're right, it starts with the language for ourselves. The idea of appeasing, like you were talking about, is that it really has a lot to do with identity preservation. And it's, how do I maintain my sense of self when the world around me feels very threatened? How do I not lose who I am in the midst of what's going on, like you were talking about? How do I maintain a sense of values and boundaries when work wants X, Y, and Z from me? And not only that, but now, since other people have gone, they want me to do 3 other jobs. And we're really quick just to say, yeah, I'll go and do that, because the fear and the threat of losing one's own position and losing one's financial stability and security overrides the sense that, hey, this isn't really what I signed up for, and I'm not very good at those things. And it creates a whole nother set of stresses for people.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the helpful pieces in this conversation is, how can we then parse out some examples as we explore this a little bit further, especially with school starting and the Groundhog Day experience that is COVID, where you wake up and there's something different, but not quite, and you're trying to figure it out, as well as how to display emotions, especially if we've been taught not to. And often that's for, we categorize that to a male tendency, that men are taught not to, but really it's any upbringing. It can be family dynamic where you didn't express it, and yet there are different permissions for a person who identifies as female to be able to enter and start expressing different emotions. And then trying to figure out, like, how do we plan during some of this work, knowing that it feels like, what's the point of planning when we have no idea if it's going to happen, and what does that actually do to our emotions when we don't want to be disappointed, so we'd prefer not to plan at all. And so as we dive into this a little bit more, we'll just kind of pick and engage in that way, if that works for you.
Yeah, no, that was a lot, and those are all wonderful directions, and I'll look forward to talking about it, and I won't be disappointed with any of those.
Great.
It'll be fun.
Good. So one of the things that has come up for Ian and I, as well as many in our congregation, is how do we navigate through grief and sorrow during times that produce what feels like a lot of it, more than usual. And yet our typical outlets for processing and marking that grief and sorrow are also not available. And so I know for Ian and I, the person we gave Julian's middle name from died about a month or 2 months after Julian was born. And so great Uncle Bob, still we have not had a service for him, and trying to mark that. And so what was interesting is actually an unexpected marker just happened last week. My uncle was a remarkable fisherman. We have these remarkable journals where he would say he hiked somewhere and found this lake here in Colorado that, like, no one really had been to, or frequented. And that's where he would fish and all these things. And so we had a friend of ours, as we were selling his fishing gear, buy one of his fly fishing reels and rods, and she took a picture. So she went fishing for the first time, fly fishing, and it has RS Padboy, Robert Stanley Padboy, on the handle of the rod. And it was one of the first times since March that it felt like we had some kind of ritual, right? That somebody was able to do something to mark something for our uncle. And we're not the only ones who've lost folks. We're not the only ones who received tough news. And so, or that we haven't been able to have a memorial service, or in the ways that we thought we could. How might we understand our emotions? How might we process? How might we learn new markings and rituals that would be meaningful to process that grief and sorrow that we're feeling during these times?
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, that sucks that you lost
Yeah.
one of Julian's namesakes, and haven't had the opportunity to gather with the other people who cared for him and about him, who remembered him well and fondly, and share the stories and experiences that made him special to you all.
Thank you.
And special enough. That's really tough and really hard. I can only imagine, to try to continue to have the story rummage around inside you without the outlets that you expect. And I think you used a great word there, the ritual. You expect to give certain markers or give certain kind of waypoints along the process. You know, I think A couple things just here as I was listening to you. It's important to separate grief and mourning
Mm,
first and foremost in just
mhm,
kind of how we think about the whole process. And
mhm,
that grief is kind of what we do inside ourselves and what we feel
mhm,
inside ourselves, and mourning is what we do on the outside to express what we're feeling
mm,
inside.
mhm, mhm,
And churches, more than anything else, churches are really good at mourning, or at least
mhm,
initiating that mourning process through memorial services or celebrations of life or other kinds of opportunities, again, for people to gather and tell stories in a particular way. In churches, we tell them through the lens of scripture and through the lens of sacred texts that are at least either important to us or important to them.
mhm,
Um, and we tend to try to find the spaces in their lives where those scriptures and sacred texts come alive.
mhm,
And so it's an opportunity to mourn in community.
mm,
It's a ritual for mourning in community. And the thing I think for us to realize is that mourning always happens in relationship.
mm,
So where grief, it happens. Grief happens when we're alone at night and we're remembering and we're reminiscing and we're thinking about the experiences, both of what someone meant to us and what the loss of new experiences means
mhm,
to us as well. And so, um, not only with people who are dying, but just any kind of loss that we experience, the loss of freedom, the inability to go out and go to the botanic gardens or to go to an
mm,
event or go to a restaurant or go to a concert or spend a barbecue with friends and have all the hugs and the handshakes that we want. All of those are losses in
mhm,
many ways, and all of those are appropriate to grieve and appropriate to mourn.
mhm,
Um, and a lot of friends and colleagues of mine and I have been talking about the real extended period of grief and loss that we're having right now, and the impact that that has on us in the long run,
mm,
especially if we don't find ways like you're talking about to mourn, and find ways to acknowledge what the experience of that person or that, again, event or experience meant to us
mm,
in ways that help us adapt to what's in front of us now.
mhm,
Um, I think there are a number of ways to mourn, and my hesitation here a little bit is that it's so different for everybody.
mhm,
Um, you know, a lot of times we like to talk about grief in stages. But if you
mhm,
really look at the stages of grief, a lot of those are just emotions that we
mm,
experience in the grief process.
mhm,
And really more so than a staged set of emotions. Uh, Grief and mourning are about how we dance with the
mhm,
loss. And if you think about how you might dance with a partner, that
mhm,
sometimes you embrace and sometimes you're evading one another and sometimes you're just
mhm,
encountering. And so that idea of kind of coming close to things but not actually engaging it, maybe coming close and fully engaging it, and seeing each other but maintaining a distance.
mm,
And so that kind of dance for me is really more what the grief process is about. There are times in our lives when we are capable of really embracing what we've lost.
mm,
And in those moments, really fully embracing what it means to lose something or someone or some experience or some set of future experiences. There are times when we can walk up to it and recognize that it's there, but we can't quite fully embrace it. We can't quite get into that space that we need to. And there are times that we look at it and we really have to avoid it because it's too much, it's too overwhelming. That it's in the middle of the workday and I can't do that right now. You know, all sorts of things that could be going on. And the piece of it is, for me, is that all of those are valid responses to experiencing grief. They're all okay, and they're all perfectly fine. If we're constantly using one, then that's when we get ourselves into trouble. If we're always evading our grief, then it's always going to hover over us, and it's always going to cast, it's going to block our ability to see the things going on around us. If we're only encountering but never really engaging our grief, then we'll be okay, but we won't feel like ourselves. And if we're constantly embracing it, then we become overwhelmed and dependent on that grief to help us move forward. And so the thing is to figure out the rhythm of your process and in your grief. And along with that, what are the ideas, what are the experiences of mourning, again, that happen in relationship? That could be in relationship to the page when you journal. It could be in relationship to pictures that you look at. Could be in relationship to conversations that you have. And in these days, we have to be creative with how we mourn. And that could be something as simple or hard as journaling. Could be starting a group text with people that would have been at a memorial service and checking in with one another from time to time. It could be starting a Facebook wall or a series of Instagram posts where people have the opportunity to post pictures, where again, we're creating space as a community together to share our lived experience of someone or our lived experience of the loss that we're having at that particular moment. And so, write a letter, write an email, create a caring bridge space, a Facebook wall. Churches can create a space during their worship service for people to write this is what I missed and this is what I'm learning during COVID time. This is what I love, this is what I've lost. Those spaces that allow us to publicly begin to normalize that we're all experiencing some loss, we're all experiencing something different in these moments. And as such, we're better off when we experience it together.
One of the things I keep, as you were speaking, it reminded me of how folks are comparing their loss to each other. If their loss is just, they would say just A, whatever that just A is, whether it's just a trip or it's just a concert. It's not, I didn't lose my job. I didn't lose a loved one. And yet, and maybe that's part of evading, I'm not sure, but I think it's also this desire not to have self-pity, but self-pity isn't acknowledging emotion. So how can we practice being able to say, I missed this, or this is really a loss for whatever reason, without feeling like we have to qualify the severity or qualify our grief about it, compared to somebody else, right? How can we practice that, and know that it's not self-pity, right? Where is that distinction maybe that we can help folks talk through?
Right. Well, and I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is that grief is not a competitive sport.
Mm-hmm.
There are no Olympics of grief where you win the gold if you have the most losses or the most tragedy in your life. And everybody's not competing in the same sport in the first place. And so what may seem like a small loss to some people may actually be a huge loss to other folks. And this is where I think, I mean, for lack of a better term, grace is really important. But more so than that, the big word, the big phrase I would use is empathic imagination. The ability to imagine with empathy what it must be like for someone to experience a loss and to feel vulnerable enough to share it. And to use that as the grounding point or the starting point for conversation, rather than that's not so bad, let me tell you about mine, which is sometimes, or even thinking that's not so bad, mine's so much worse, which gets us in it puts us in a state of automatic disconnection with people rather than connection with people. And so if we can just learn kind of the simple words of that must be really hard, tell me what it's like, rather than, yeah, that's bad, let me tell you about mine. And so because that's when we start to get into that comparison or that competitiveness. Yes, we have a hierarchy of griefs that we like to posit that are out there. The difficulty is that we don't live other people's lives for them and with them. We live in relationship to them. And in that relationship, it requires some of that grace, it requires some of that empathy, and it requires some of that imagination to say that our losses may be different, but the feelings of loss may be very similar. If we can actually focus on the feelings and the intensity of feelings rather than the content of the conversation, we can have, I think, deeper and more vulnerable conversations about what it means to grieve and what it means to lose something, and feel connected to people around those conversations rather than feel competitive with people around those conversations. And the other thing that enables us to do is just to stop fixing it. Because usually the comparisons and the competitions there are about, that's fixable and mine is not. And I can fix yours, and that'll give me a little relief from my own grief. We as a culture aren't very good at grief. I think when I teach or run some grief support groups, one of the things that I learned in some of my research is that the average amount of time that an American feels like someone should be allowed to grieve is 24 hours.
Whoa.
Anything beyond 24 hours and it's considered maladaptive, or you're doing it wrong. On the flip side of that, the grief literature says that it takes about 1,000 days to really kind of shift into what life looks like after a loss. And that's not 1,000 days of constantly dealing with it, but that encounter, embrace, evade kind of process. So really about 3 years before we're gathering a sense of, okay, this is what life is like, and I have a new set of routines and a new set of habits, and a new perspective on the loss, so that I can re-engage in the most meaningful ways possible.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a great discrepancy between the permission we want to give people to grieve and really what it may take to move effectively through some of those losses.
It's really helpful in a lot of ways, because I think we can apply that to ourselves. If we're the person saying, well, mine's not as bad as theirs, so I should just be grateful, we can also have empathic imagination for ourselves, right? That ability to touch what we're feeling instead of dismissing it or negating it. And I think that allows for us to be present,
Yeah.
right? Instead of either wishing what we're going through away, like you were saying at the beginning, what are we moving towards instead of not having that direction?
Right. Well, I think, yeah, self-compassion is deeply ingrained in some of this, and even if we don't feel comfortable sharing what it is we're grieving, or the emotions that we're experiencing, being in touch with our own sense, being vulnerable with ourselves, being compassionate toward ourselves, offers us a whole nother language for connecting with other people around their loss.
Mm-hmm.
It offers us the creativity and a sense of being able to say, I can't imagine what you're going through, but I can imagine it feels like this.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine it feels angry. I imagine it feels sad. I can imagine feeling alone, or whatever it might be. And so some of that self-reflective and self-compassion for what it is we are experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
can allow us a better opportunity to connect with others as well.
Mm-hmm. And that makes me think about the kind of Groundhog Day descriptor that people are using for COVID times, right? Same day, some things are different. I know that in our house, we joke that like we don't know what day it is because there aren't the typical markers, that even weekends don't feel like weekends in the same way. And part of that for us, like the only thing that's constantly changing is our kid who's 5 months, right? So part of the struggle is we finally get into a rhythm and then he has a growth spurt and something changes. And so if we didn't have that, it's one of those where we're not sure what that would look like. And in some ways that presents its own challenges, right? We finally get into a rhythm of naps, and then he's like, I'm going to drop a nap and not take long ones. And I'm like, cool, I'll figure out how to get work done. And yet it's the same and yet different week after week, that it's interesting. Like, how do we give language to experiencing something? It almost reminds me of a labyrinth, but not as peaceful or enjoyable, right? Where you're at the same spot, but in a different way, right? So I'm curious, how might we understand feelings and emotions, as well as just the fact that a lot of what we're feeling, like you said earlier on, is a constant state of fear, but in a different way and a different flavor each week when the world feels as daunting as it is. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. I can reiterate it differently, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. Who knows if the response will make sense at all. We have 7 days in a week, and all of them are Blur's Day. And it's I've shared with you, my own, what I call to other folks, my own COVID breakdown about 2 weeks ago. And that sense that I woke up on a Tuesday morning and thought it was Friday, went through my day and woke up on a Wednesday morning and thought it was Friday again, and then did the same on Thursday, and then Friday just wound up not even being that great of a day to anticipate. And you know, if it weren't for my electronic calendar, I would have been waiting for my Friday appointments to show up all the time. And so this, and I'm continuing to kind of reflect on that experience and reflect on what I'm learning from those moments. But one of the things that popped into my head as I was thinking about that was how much of our lives revolve around experience and event. How much we look forward to certain things, how much we depend on certain things to create a routine for us. So, Sunday morning church. It's an event. It's an event that we can anticipate. It's, as far as all of us are concerned, Jesus instituted Sunday morning worship, and it's never changed since then. And they always met in person, and they always had a little red brick building with pews in it. That's where that happened. And so, having those events, having a weekend be a weekend, and our capacity to set brackets around that space or set it off as it's a separate container, really informs how we ritualize life. It informs how we rhythmically move in life. A commute in the morning to work, getting up, getting ready, getting in a car, driving to a parking lot, parking in a particular space, and walking to a desk. As much as we may think we do that rotely, we do it ritually. There's some intention behind it. Similar when we get, when we pack up our desk at the end of the day and put our stuff in a briefcase and walk to our car and walk, or get on the bus or do whatever it is we do to move from a workspace to a home space. Those are rituals that we do over and over again with a certain kind of intent to mark and bracket space. And part of what this has done to us, and maybe even for us, is to blur those ritual spaces, those beginnings and those endings, those capacities to bracket. Our family here, we had the privilege and luck to have one day be a going out to a restaurant day. Well, we haven't had that day as a family in 5 months. And given anxieties about things and deliveries and other stuff, we didn't even order in for a long time either. And so that kind of threw off our rituals some, and ways that we would connect with other friends and ways that we would connect with one another. And so yeah, it becomes hard to punctuate the stories that we're living when it just feels like one big run-on sentence. We're in a Faulkner novel right now where there's one capital letter and 45 pages later there's a period and an end of a chapter. I always hated those books when they were assigned, because it's nice and neat when things are divided up into chunks. It's nice when you know what's going to go on in a paragraph, and the next paragraph's going to inform you of something new that's going on in the story. And there's just not that stuff there to create the story the way we're used to creating it. And really, I think I'm still working it out, honestly. I'm still trying to figure out what that routine looks like, what actually is a weekend. There have been several instances, where I've said to myself, well, why don't I just plan that for Saturday, because it doesn't matter. Why don't I just open client times on Saturday because it doesn't really matter when I see them. And if it doesn't matter to me, it probably doesn't matter to them. Same with our kids and trying to get routines started. I mean, it's been the hardest thing to get routines started with kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. And, one of them will spend all day reading a book and never leave her room, and the other one will spend all day on TV and never leave the couch if she could. And they would do that day after day, day in, day out, without some kind of routine or some kind of challenge. And 5 months in, and we're still trying to figure that out, especially with school coming up. And what does virtual school look like, and what do those routines look like, and what will be required of us? And again, that's a bracket time. If we want to think about it, culturally for us, August, September is a time that we bracket the end of summer and the beginning of fall, because that's when school starts. But school's going to start, and home is not going to change for many of us. My kids will be here. I'll just have slower bandwidth on my internet because they'll both be in virtual school all day, every day. And my spouse will be upstairs working all day, every day. And so, part of the thing that I've advocated for folks as a simple way of kind of bracketing things and giving ourselves a bracket is creating a commute. Even if you're continuing to work from home, it's what's the breakfast routine that's important to you? How can you actually walk outside your door, walk around the block, and come sit back at your desk, rather than take your breakfast down to your desk and just start working. Similar with the commute home. How do you leave the space? There was another therapist talking about it this morning. Every day, he, at the end of his day, closes his laptop, packs it up in a bag, packs up his work phone in a bag, and puts it away till the next day. Doesn't look at it anymore. And that's his ritual for saying, okay, work day is over, it's family time now. And so a ritual for me is really nothing more than a habit that we do with intention. That is, we're present to it and we're intentional about it. And so part of this is, how do we get in the habit of being intentional around certain things? Whether it's a family movie night, whether it's watching church on Sunday in your pajamas, and or we have a ritual at Christmas that we cook a certain meal on Christmas morning. We've done it for the last 4 or 5 years, and there would be an uproar if we didn't do it again. But creating those things that we do with intention and with meaning to provide punctuation, to not live in the run-on sentence. Because we want to figure out life like a story. And we want to be able to tell the stories of our days, and when each day runs together, it's hard to have a new story, or even a different story. Or when everybody is seeing your story around you, it's hard to believe somebody might be interested in it, or that there's something interesting to tell. And so that capacity to create in our days some punctuation, some brackets, some commute space, some commute times, can hopefully help us navigate some of that blurring together of the lines. That week after I had a week of Fridays, I very intentionally got up on Saturday and said, this is Saturday. And on Sunday, I made sure, for me, woodworking has been my COVID hobby. And so I made sure on Sunday that I got out in the workshop and spent a few hours out there doing some work or challenging myself with a particular project. And then said, okay, Monday is coming up. This is what this is. And I try to vary my routines now is one of the things I'm learning as well. I used to always have clients on Fridays. I used to always have certain meetings on Wednesdays. So now I'll have a meeting on a Thursday afternoon, which was usually a pretty open day. And yesterday was pretty open, so I spent it in the wood shop, working on a desk for my daughter for her school starting up here. So little things that can throw a bit of a wrench into the habits that we have, so that when we come back, we can be intentional about the spaces that we enter. For me, that's what I'm experimenting with right now. Ask me next month and I may have 5 different things that I think or that I'm doing. But this situation requires great adaptivity of us in a time that feels really monotonous. And really, well, I'll take a step back here. Until we grieve what we've lost, we're going to be evading that opportunity to embrace what's in front of us. And so that capacity to acknowledge and feel what it is that we're feeling without being consumed by it, to embrace some of the changes that we've experienced, or at least to come up to them and say, wow, this is new. It's not pretty. I don't want to look at it much. But even the similar feels new. And that's been a lot of what I've been talking with pastors and clergy about is that, have you grieved? Have you experienced the loss of the routine, the Sunday morning worship, the way that worship was supposed to be, the way Jesus intended it all those many years ago, and the Tuesday morning staff meeting where everybody got donuts or somebody brought coffee and we all sat around the table and did our thing. If you haven't grieved those things, then all we're going to do is long to repeat what we've lost in spaces that really need our creativity and our innovation and our adaptation. And we get stuck in those routines. And I don't want that for anybody, much less myself and my family. And so, let's grieve. And out of grief, let's see what's shifted and changed, and what we want to embrace and have become a part of that ritual of what life is for us, and what we want to say, I'll do it for now, but once this is all over, I can do away with that. I cannot have that anymore. Be okay with that.
One of the things that you were saying made me think of how folks want to go back to normal, right? And that most folks, when I hear them say that, they also acknowledge that normal's not going to happen in the ways that they would like. And so I wonder if a better phrase would be, I need to grieve what I had considered to be normal and figure out how to be present in this constant state of adjusting so that a new normal, whatever that may be, whatever normal newness is, can happen. And, I was trying to think as you were saying, what are the punctuation marks throughout the week? And I was thinking back, and for us, because our kids so little and constantly changing, ours are having to constantly change. At first it was that we would go for an evening walk at this time because he was still so little, constantly sleeping through the day. You didn't have to pay attention to his routine. And then we started getting into a colic season, and there was no punctuation, and we just ached for something. other than colic. And then by the grace of formula shift, there was an end to colic. And then it was Friday night pizza. And then I was like, I got to work on my mom Sunday morning breakfast game. Like, I want my kids' friends to be like, oh, we're going to the Fletcher's house because she makes homemade donuts. So I've learned how to make homemade donuts. Or, you know, the things that you're like, what can I use post-COVID? As well as being able to, but I loved what you said, like, how can we use it not to ignore this time or just wish it away, but to mark this time. And I think being able to mark this time is something that we really need to figure out how to practice more, because if all we do is wish it away, one of my cousins shared something like, when COVID's over is starting to sound like when I win the lottery, right? Like, it's this big aspiration that you don't believe is going to happen. And so if we're wishing this thing away, we wish part of our life away.
Right.
And yet, what would it look like to be able to find those punctuation marks, to be able to find those things that allow ritual or meaning, if nothing else, even if it doesn't happen regularly, like to find meaning in the ways that we mark things. So I really appreciate that framework also as to why Groundhog Day feeling happens, right? And, you know, there's the ability also to acknowledge that what you needed, like you said, what may work for me this week may not work for me next week. And I know Ian and I have had conversations around, like, when we would have a couples check-in, it could last like for a while, for a distinct season. Like, there wasn't a whole lot changing, there wasn't a whole lot happening. And now for us, because our kid, we can mark the pandemic because it's how old our kid is. Like, our kid has only known pandemic life, and we have only known pandemic parenting. And so it was one of those of being able to realize what worked before. And this was a real tension for he and I early on, because I'd be like, that's not working anymore. And he's like, wait, but we just talked about it last week. Like, why is it not working? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just telling you, I know it's not working, and we need to figure something out. And I think that's the other struggle, is what once worked for relationships, or what once worked for natural buffers in relationships, have shifted.
Right.
And so being aware that we're in a season that we may not have, I use the phrase, I don't have a file, or I don't have a box for that. I don't have a previous experience to understand what's going on. And none of us do. None of us have lived through a pandemic. We're actively learning and being able to cope and process. And so I think being able to understand that we're also so marked by these daily or weekly transitions that haven't happened, to be able to say, okay, what could, and see it, as you previous said, you know, an empathic imagination to a daily imagination. Like, how can we be creative? How do we see this as an open canvas of creatively engaging, knowing that this is going to be a while, and seeing how that might shift our fight, flight, freeze, or appease modes to reacting, right? And being able to see it differently, knowing that school this year is going to look, who knows, right? And we think we know, and then it may change, and how do we process when things are continually changing?
Right.
And finding those markers, I think, is helpful. One of the other things you've noted is, what are we moving towards? And so that makes me wonder also with school and some other things, when so many things are adjusting due to safety measure, not because we necessarily are choosing, but because we're being informed by scientists, politicians, our jobs, our communities, by so many external forces that, you know, it's better if we do this, it's better if we don't do this, etc., that it feels like, what's the point in planning? And trying to figure out, also, it may not feel safe to plan. Like, you may want to go on a trip to a safe dynamic, right? Like, as safe as COVID, like whatever your COVID risk barometer is, right? And finding that it's like, well, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe we just don't plan and we just kind of go through things. How can we navigate that when it feels like part of planning allows us to move towards something, as well as give a sense of not control, but a sense of forward trajectory, right? Like, I've planned this for when, right? And as we just previously talked, sometimes we need markers, right? Like, we're going on this trip and I can work and get through this until this happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but think we're coming up on a holiday season that's very significant for folks, not like often our spring holidays, which tend to be more nuclear family, if at all celebrated. They might be big, they might not. Whereas our fall and winter holidays tend to be very community driven, and planning may feel not just pointless, but a great loss. So how do we navigate that within our COVID safety barometer, and understanding that planning used to be a part of how we processed?
Yeah, that I think of all the statements that you gave to me, or questions that you gave to me, is probably the hardest one. The blurring together and the that one's difficult, I think, because it's so present day to day. But you know, I certainly hear what you're talking about with those events that we have come to depend on to give us some sense of safety, or some sense of aspire to, or some sense of this is what we always do. You know, we the churches that I've worked in, you know, we always do the offering after the sermon. We never do the offering before the sermon. And then some churches are, you know, we never do the offering after the sermon. We always do the offering before the sermon, because you don't want the preacher to feel like, you know, that you're paying for whatever they gave them that day, and whatever that is. All sorts of just fun liturgical worshipy things that come in that are about always and never. You know, until I moved to Denver, I always had Christmas Eve at my mother's house. And we've been here 15 years. And we were able to make it once or twice in those 15 years. And so our always had to change. When we were in seminary, we always, you know, my wife and I, after we got married, for the first 5 or 6 years, always alternated important holidays between our families. So Thanksgiving with one, Christmas with the other. 5 years into marriage, we got tired of driving that much between that space, so we started to have Friendsgiving. So every Thanksgiving we would meet with friends who couldn't go with their family, and we would just do our own thing. And you know, that's a tradition that's carried on for 20 years now. And so, you know, and it'll be different this year, because you know, our friends do different things with the COVID news than we do. And there's issues of safety and issues of concern, and that goes with issues of nostalgia, and issues with knowing what's fun, and what we enjoy, and what's ritual and routine and habitual in many faces, and it'll be something, it'll be a change that we grieve and
Mhm.
that we mourn in many ways. Um, and that we'll just have to try to figure out when we get there, which is the difficult part. I was
Mhm.
listening to what you were saying a little bit ago, and what kind of stuck out to me and what continues to kind of rummage around in the back of my head, and this is something I'm as guilty of as anybody, is the overuse of the term normal.
Mhm.
Um, we use it to describe people. We use
Mhm.
it as something to aspire to.
Mhm.
Um, People who have mental health concerns aspire to have a normal mental life.
Mhm.
People who we have difficulty with people with physical disabilities or differences because they don't feel normal to us.
Mhm.
Um, you know, People who don't work 9 to 5 jobs aren't don't have normal employment. Dads who stay at home with kids while wives work have an abnormal family situation.
Mhm.
All these things that we do to make ourselves feel safe
Mhm.
is behavior that's around normalizing rather than recognizing difference.
Mhm.
Um, and so the curiosity for me that comes out of that, and just in what you were talking about marking this time specifically,
Mhm.
is how do we recognize and embrace difference
Mhm.
rather than seek to hold people to a kind of arbitrary stance of what's normal.
Mhm.
I need to return to this. I need to do this for this to feel like me,
Mhm.
rather than recognizing that we are in so many ways gifted with adaptability,
Mhm.
and gifted with creativity and imagination and empathy and relationship
Mhm.
to be able in whatever moment we're in to do the best next kind of right thing in that moment, but
Mhm.
as best as we can, knowing that sometimes that's just really not very good, but it's good enough
Mhm.
to get us
Mhm.
through things. And so the curiosity that comes out of here, especially as we begin to mark holidays and
Mhm.
begin to do those things that are really culturally significant. And I mean that like inter-family and
Mhm.
intra-family, and
Mhm.
is how do we understand the difference of this time and learn to find ways to celebrate the difference of this time together, and do it with some sense of this doesn't have to be forever. Just because you do it one time doesn't
Mhm.
mean that this is what it's going to be like all the time.
Mhm.
We probably will have a Zoom Christmas
Mhm.
this year,
Yeah.
and if that's the case, that doesn't mean that every year from now on it will be a Zoom Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we will probably have a Zoom Friendsgiving where we sit around the table and eat together over Zoom with a couple other families that we might generally do things with, that will remind us both of what's important to us, but also remind us of what we've lost. And,
Mhm.
and at the same time, will be different, and we will probably hope not to do it again if we don't have to.
Sure.
And and so I don't know that I'm kind of getting to where you are, or the question that you're asking, especially around plans and around predictability,
Mhm.
because we're really in a space where and you and I talked about this a little bit, that the greatest thing that we can predict is the unpredictability of what comes next.
Mm-hmm.
The best thing that we can plan for is that plans will change.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we can be completely certain that we are uncertain what next week will look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we've just as a parent, we've gone from I think in May, surveys about hybrid school, online school, or all in-person school, to no information about school, to we're going to go back full-time in person to school within a week. We are going to go full-time online for the first 2 weeks of school. To a week later, we are going to go full-time or full-time virtual school through mid-October. And so, you know, we will plan for that. And really what we're planning for is full-time virtual school through the end of the year at the very least.
Mm-hmm.
And more than likely, probably a full year of virtual school.
Yeah.
Because the unpredictability is what we can plan for.
Yeah.
In many ways.
One of the things that, as I was thinking of our conversation collectively, the opportunity to creatively create new plans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we may have previous plans that are around holidays. We always did it this way, or we always did it that way. One of the things that, you know, I've had to grapple with, I think early on in March, I was like, oh, Julian's first year of life is going to look very different than we had anticipated. Almost as like I'm going to plan for the worst, but it's not really going to get there. Like it'll be better before his first birthday. And now I'm like, oh, our holidays are going to not be in the ways that my nieces and nephews' first holidays were. And yet that had been, and there is a bit of grief to that. And I'm sure I'll feel it when it actually happens. But as I was hearing you talk, Jason, one of the things that really came to mind was, how can we use this for the things that we typically wouldn't get to do? So how, not having to split holidays, how do we really just soak up the fact that we get to maybe do whatever maybe we go camping, maybe we do something that's, you know, within our COVID safety measures of exploration,
Right.
but we wouldn't typically get to do that if we had relatives in or we were going to relatives. And based off of our other conversations, I get to also acknowledge when grief happens, acknowledge if I'm evading it, approaching it, or engaging it. And I also have the chance to mark it in different ways. And so I think when it comes to planning, we can plan for whatever may be, knowing that it can change. And if it changes, we have these skills to be able to mark the disappointment, to mark the frustration. I mean, just you talking about schooling, I can imagine that it felt exhaustive and hopeful and frustrating, depending on what the news was.
Yeah.
And maybe all at the same time, when you heard you were going back, the kids were going back full-time in person, it may have been a sigh of relief that they would be not in the house for the first time in 5 months, as well as like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when schools are open full-time, and how is that going to work?
How are they going to do that? Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think one of the things when you know about creativity is a chance for us to explore things that weren't normal, whatever that was, right? As well as acknowledging that if we really looked back at what was normal, we may not have liked it, but we knew how to engage it. And I think that's a big difference, to acknowledge we may not know how to play this game right now of having, as my grad students would say, we're pivoting a lot. Like, you're asking us to pivot regularly, to use your word, adaptability, and allowing for the space to go, I feel like I don't want to adapt again today. Or I'm almost wondering, so one of my colleagues who, from my first church job, she was is an introvert. I am not. And so she gave me this really helpful phrase of, I've hit my word count for the day. Or I'm almost at my word count for the day. So if I'd walk into her office and know that what I was about to bring up could potentially be very energy draining, I'd go, where are we at in word count? Like, are we at the start of it? Are we starting to deplete it? Do I need to come back tomorrow? And I think when it comes to our adaptability, we almost need to have a word count version of that. I'm done adapting for today, knowing that we may actually still need to adapt, but naming that I'm done with this for today. And then knowing that we have tomorrow and being able to engage it in those ways, because I think when we got, like, one of the things we may long for how things were, is that we knew how much energy it took from us, and we knew how to get through, and we knew how to prepare. And when we can't plan, when we don't have our rituals, when we don't have our habits, when we don't have our buffers, it can feel like we constantly don't know what's coming our way. Yeah. And we don't know how to engage, or, wow, I thought I had energy and I didn't, or why did that hit me harder than I thought it would? And so our whole conversation's making me think around the ways that we can explore and dream and navigate around ourselves. Yeah. The world around us is a state of, I don't even know if we'd call it controlled chaos, but it often feels chaotic.
Sure.
And it often feels like it could be forced upon us, like it is coming at us versus us engaging it. And part of that is the safety measures. When you're at home, it creates that actual barrier, right? And being able to really have this be a chance to explore who we are, to explore how we feel, and to explore what our individual friends, families, engagement, exploration, creativity can be. And not to make it all roses, like, oh, look at how wonderful it is that we get to create all these things. Yeah. But to say, oh man, we've been thrown for a loop. Yeah. How can we re-engage? Yeah. And what does that look like? And so that leads me to our final question, which is
before you hit there,
oh,
just really
sorry,
quick,
Jason.
I was going to say, no worries. When you were talking, it sparked an image in my head of just thinking about, if you have a favorite book that you've read over and over again that just sits on your nightstand, and it cover to cover, and you go back to it because it's meaningful, and it just keep reading it over and over again. And someone has, comes in the middle of the night and takes the pages out but leaves the cover there and inserts an entirely new book in the same old cover. And you open it up expecting the same familiar pages, and you start to read, and all of a sudden there's this brand new book. And we have a choice. We have a choice to continue reading and seeing what's there. We have a choice to be mad that the whole book's changed. We have a choice to be really sad that, we just stare at the cover of the book and long for those old pages that used to be there. Or we just have the opportunity to maybe just read it one page at a time and see what's different. And, part of it is giving ourselves permission. That was the other thing that came to mind as you were talking there, that this is this can be a time of good permission giving. For permission to assess, was this actually a helpful ritual to do? Was this really meaningful? to me what would be different that could be important, what might be on the next page of that book. This was interesting, this was not interesting. And to assess and take some time to understand our intentions about what was previously meaningful to us in ways that allow us to keep some of those things that are worth embracing. And then embrace what we might fill in the rest of the time with out of what we're learning in this space. A lot of creativity comes from difficult situations.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, sorry, you wanted to
No, that was really helpful. Well, because I think as a collective ethos in our country, it's, as you noted, like, grief is for 24 hours. And if you're not over it in 24 hours, you can't adapt, right? Or
you're not normal.
Right, that there's an issue. And so we have this issue with expressing vulnerability and emotion, like just in general. And so I think, you know, like I said, it can be based off of family makeup, it can be based off of gender stereotypes, a plethora of things. We may just say, I don't do emotions, or whatever that may mean. And I think when people say they don't do emotions, it's that they don't express them in the ways that are deemed normal, whatever that might be, or that they're not comfortable with it, right? And so how do we explore that? How do we dive in, and how do we begin to just lean in to allow emotions to be named, expressed? When we don't express our emotions, they build up. And like you said, sometimes they come out in ways that you're like, oh, that was much more intense than I was expecting. Or that's actually, I didn't realize I was feeling that. I thought it was this, but clearly something's going on over here. How can we begin to, one, encourage each other? I think modeling comes into play. How can we model over Zoom, as you noted, or how can we model when we're not together? Ways to actually process and begin expressing emotion when our society says there's only a few that are allowed, and only at these times and in these capacities.
Right. So I mean, just a couple responses to that, and I'm going to start really big and hopefully titrate down really small here. So the really cool thing about emotions is that without them, we don't remember well. So when we have an emotional experience, those memories actually kind of get tagged in our brains as more important. So an emotional memory is a memory that lasts longer. It's a memory that's easier to recall, and it's a memory that's more vivid. And so when we lose that capacity to feel what we are experiencing, we actually lose what we experience over time, because those memories aren't as important, those stories aren't as important. And to your point, to some extent, is that if we have one of those kind of volcanic eruptions of emotional experience, that gets tagged really heavily. And if it feels unsafe, then the memories we have around emotions are that emotions are unsafe. Because that's what gets recalled the next time an emotion comes up. Is that, oh, this is unsafe and I need to blunt it, or I need to mute the feeling, or something unsafe is going to happen again. And so over time, I think culturally, and I think different cultures experience emotions differently. Different genders have certain kinds of acceptances when it comes to outside perceptions of emotions rather than internal things, because internally, we all have the same capacities to experience an emotional life as we go from event to event or experience to experience.
Hmm.
Built into our brains, this God-given amalgamation of neurons and transmitters and all that stuff that's up there that makes us who we are, is the capacity to feel. The just going back to those simple four words, the capacity to be mad, the capacity to be glad, the capacity to feel sadness, the capacity to feel afraid. And at the same time, there is a great deal of skepticism, because emotions are so powerful, as to how they skew our perceptions of things. We talked a bit about that with fear, how it privileges certain responses to the environment around us. And the same thing for being angry. It privileges a certain response, a violent response, a righteous response, a response for more justice. And all along that spectrum are different kinds of behaviors and different kinds of reactions. And so what becomes important to me, and the genesis of our conversation in many ways was work that I did with men many years ago, around something we termed at that time alexithymia, which I think can be extended far beyond men, but it's just Latin for not lexa, words, thymia, feelings. No words for feelings. And it really is, more than anything else, a taught deficit. We teach people not to say what they're feeling. We don't teach the words of expression for what they have, and so we don't have a great deal of a vocabulary around what it is we feel, or what it is that we are experiencing beyond the content description. I can describe to you what we did or what we talked about, but I can't describe to you how it felt to talk about those things or do them. And there's a great difference. So when we had our one little tiny summer vacation this year, which was a couple of days up in Grand Lake, Colorado, which is a place that we love to go and hike. And the only reason why we were comfortable going is we were the first person staying in the house after it being shuttered for 2 months. So we knew it was clean. We didn't have to take a carload of wipes to make sure, and Clorox to make sure it was all going to be safe for us. But one of the things we did on that hike was there's an abandoned fire station on the top of one of the mountains outside of Grand Lake, and it's about 5.5 miles in and 5.5 back, with about a 1,000-foot elevation gain. And we didn't know what kind of hike we were going to get on and what we were going to do. And we had an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old with us who were coming along, and both of them made it up. We grumbled along the way, and we grumbled openly along the way that, we could see it off in the distance, and we're like, no, that's not where we're going. That's just too doggone far for us to go there. And my feet hurt, so we had to find creative solutions to distractions from pain. And to keep encouragement around, rather than seeing something that's so far off and being discouraged about that. And we went up and we came down, and the way that we tell the story is not, okay, so you walk about a mile flat along the river, and then you have about a 600-foot elevation gain that takes you to the top of the mountain, and you walk the ridge around the mountain, and you walk the valley, and then you walk the ridge to the other mountain, and then you're there, and then you come home. That's a great fact-based explanation of the 11 miles that we spent as a family trying to figure out how to get there and back and be a family still. And so one of the ways and one of the reasons why this was an important story for us for that time is how proud our kids were and how proud we were of our kids, and being able to express our excitement together and our sense and feeling of accomplishment for doing something that we didn't think we could do, and going that far, having, you know, this being our second hike of the trip, and just how proud we were of them, and being able to express that to them, that, you know, we are so excited and so happy and so proud of you for making it up there and back, and making it up there better than I did in some ways. I probably grumbled the most of anybody, because my knees and heels don't work as well as they did when they were 8 and 12 years old. But that idea and that sense of accomplishment and that story is meaningful, not because we did it, but because we felt it.
Yeah.
We felt what it was like to experience. We felt what it was like to push ourselves, and to do something new and to do something different. And it's a family story that we share now. It's not a, here's this hike and here's what you're going to do. Here's this hike and here's why it was meaningful to us. And, you know, our kids tell it because, you know, we had fun creating little candy surprises for them when they got tired so that they could be, you know, distracted. We created the Skittle Burst, which is, you know, you take a bunch of Skittles and stuff it into a Starburst, and then you stuff it in your mouth and see what flavors you experience.
Okay.
So, you know, all sorts of little things that we're going to remember from that, not because we did it, but because we were emotionally available to what was going on in the story. You know, I'm completely aware of my frustration when you know, when the 8-year-old wanted to stop and not go any further, and my elation when she decided to continue and she was the first one up the mountain. You know, all of those little things make that story real, and make it richer, and make it more memorable, because we chose to feel it rather than just do it. And so, you know, in thinking about emotions and in thinking about vulnerability, and Brene Brown is one of my patron saints, of course, and a lot of her research is on, you know, true strength lying in our capacity to be vulnerable with one another. And feelings are that big frontier of vulnerability. The moments that we're embarrassed, the moments that we can come back and say, I didn't do that right. The moments that we can say, you know, this is upsetting me, and I'm angry, and here's why. And not use that as a reason to separate us in relationship, but use it as a reason to really validly connect us to another person. I'm sad that you chose this. I'm disappointed that this is what, you know, we could or couldn't do this time. And in being able to name that, I think, you know, again, going back to permission giving, it gives permission for other people to name it for themselves as well. Just because you name an emotion doesn't mean you're stuck there. Doesn't mean that's the only thing you're going to feel in that moment. What all it does is acknowledge that there's more in the room than the facts of what's around us. And in doing so, creates the potential for a richer and more complex story. That we can all deal with those emotions that are around us, and freeing us hopefully to enjoy the space a bit more. You know, this is the, you know, the last thing I'll kind of say here. You know, it's been a curiosity to me that um, when we went to Zoom, a lot of my Zoom calls became really, really serious.
Mm.
Um, and my hypothesis around that was that we always call them meetings. You know, the default thing is this is a Zoom meeting, and meetings are business things, and business things are serious. And so I've taken to renaming all of the Zoom appointments that I have to Zoom conversations or Zoom calls. Because call and a conversation is something entirely different, and it gives us permission to laugh. Yeah. And it gives us permission to be present as people rather than to be present as business. Yeah. And so, you know, my curiosity is that if we can change the words and we can change and give permission for new and exciting kinds of words and experiences of things to be a part of our stories, the possibility of really increasing our connection to one another, regardless of whether we're in person or virtual. But more so increasing our ability to remember our lives with a richer tapestry of what really happened around us. And again, when we hear other people say it, it gives us permission to add those words to our vocabulary. So I don't just have to be mad. I can be frustrated, or I can be peeved, or I can be outraged, or I can be flustered. And all of those are gradations of just being upset and mad. And then we get a richer experience of what it is, and we understand when we really are elevated and offended by something, or when something's just kind of a minor annoyance.
Yeah.
And we get a better chance of parsing through our lives really meaningfully what an experience is, and hopefully responding better to what's going on around us rather than only reacting and only having one or two words for things.
And it makes me think, as you were talking, we will clearly, as a society, as a world, because it's a pandemic of global proportions, remember 2020. And there will be emotional memories. I think by being able to practice naming throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, as it continues, months, plural, our various emotions, we will be able to actually see the variety and complexity of emotions that tie to this time, rather than wanting to almost numb ourselves through it so that we can get to the other side. Knowing that there really isn't going to be a numbing through it, we will remember, we may just only remember the really difficult pieces of it.
Right.
And is that how we want to engage the experience? And are there other ways to engage it? Not making it rainbows and butterflies or whatever your version of that might be, but to say, I am experiencing so many things. I need to practice naming what I feel so that I don't look back on this year and just say it took over.
Right.
And that is a skill that we will need post-pandemic beyond. Because we need it now. We needed it before. And that just may be, as you said, when difficulty opens creativity, it might even be a creativity around how we practice actually knowing who we are and what we're feeling. And that is something that I think, not to sound too nostalgic, not to sound too nostalgic, is what can change our world for the better. And if we can actually model and allow folks to be present. Your daughter coming in reminds me that Ian often says on his Zoom meetings, which are meetings, those aren't as enjoyable.
It depends. Yeah.
But he goes, we're all the BBC dad, right? Remember the BBC dad was being interviewed,
Yep.
and his daughter so like proudly walked in and was like, I found daddy. And then mom comes in and is like, no.
Yep.
And, you know, I'm sure on this recording, you're going to hear my dogs in the background, my kid in the background,
Yep. You've
all
heard the
those
toilet
various
flush
things.
several times in my background,
Yeah,
probably.
you know, it's one of those where you're just like, right. And we allow people, and to use your term, as you said earlier, the grace to be human, the grace to be present. And I think one of the things we can do is allow the grace to acknowledge that we may actually be fearful, that we may be hopeful, that we may feel a variety of things on any given day, even if it feels like another Groundhog Day, and be able to invite others to express that as well. Knowing that the desire for things to be normal really is just a sense to know how to cope and how to get through. And we're being invited to explore a new way of processing and engaging and living.
Yeah.
And I appreciate so very much all the ways that you've brought to light the way emotions are engaged, as well as how we can mark time and mark ritual, and how we can be present and model for each other, even digitally.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that this time allows for newness, and we can embrace that newness, we can push against it, we can simply acknowledge it, and that we can do all of those in any given situation. It doesn't have to be a linear process. Very few things in life are linear. And so I really am just grateful for your time and engaging in this conversation as we strive to figure it out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I mean, if folks are looking for opportunities to control, we have the opportunity to tell our stories and control what we put into our stories. We can tell things simply. We can tell things with complexity. We can tell things with feeling. We can tell things with fact. We can, and you know, but while it's hard to make event-based plans right now, what we can do is plan to be present and plan to be vulnerable, and then see what happens.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. So I am just going to thank you again for your time and your wisdom, and simply being present and allowing us to explore these conversations. So thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.